I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, want to talk about the intangibles of home ownership. Now, I've done many blogs over the last 8 or 9 years on this, but it's a reoccurring problem that I see on my YouTube blog here, and I read in the Globe and Mail and Vancouver Sun comment sections about people continuing to focus on the price of real estate, how the market is overvalued. I mean, they've been saying this, if you've been in the business as long as I they've been talking about this for 30 years in Vancouver, that big crash is just around the corner. They always point to the fundamentals, how average income is not aligned with what house prices are. And I've done many blogs debunking that myth. But they continue to focus on price. You know, I'm going to wait for a better time. And I can totally understand if people think the market's going to crash next year or the year after that or whenever and stay on the sideline. However, I do know that most of these people that complain about this kind of thing, they don't have the $100,000 or $150,000 ready for down payment, and they are far from being qualified for a mortgage. So they're just, wasting their time. They're not qualified, not in a position to buy even now, or even if we do get a correction down the road. They're not going to buy either way. They're just complainers. But if you are pre-qualified and you've got the $100,000 or $150,000 to buy your first place and you want to wait on the sideline, I mean, that's up to you. But as I've said many times, if at the end of the day, if you're buying a principal residence, you've got a 30 or 40 year need. If the house goes down 2 years from now, 15 grand from what you paid for it, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference 30 or 40 years from now. My advice has always been, when you're ready to buy, when you're pre-qualified and you can buy comfortably and you've got the down payment, sure, wait for the right unit, hire a good realtor, and wait for the right unit to come up. But if you're timing the market for 2 or 3 years, waiting for some magical time, you're wasting your time. It's not going to happen. And the chances of you pulling the trigger on a market that's going down are very slim. I've talked about it in my book, and I've done many blogs on it. But I tell people, stop focusing on the price, because there's so much more to buying your principal residence. The first thing is when you own your principal residence, you're creating equity 2 ways. You're locking in historic record interest rates. We are now touching again on some of the lowest mortgage rates I've seen. I just had a client lock in a 5-year fixed term for 2.75%. Now, he's a well-qualified client, but 2.75% for 5 years. That's getting now pretty close, within 30 or 40 basis points of the all-time low that I've ever seen on a 5-year fixed. You're creating equity 2 ways. You're paying down the mortgage every month, paying down the principal. You're paying some interest as well, more interest in the first 10 years, but after 10 years that shifts and you start doing tremendous amount of damage to the principal every month. And then you're creating equity with appreciating prices. Not every year. Real estate prices don't go up in a straight line. You could have a couple of years where it goes down 5% or 8% and then treads water for a year or two, and then off it goes. But what I've always told people is, you buy a Yaletown condo today for $600,000. In 25 years, when the mortgage is paid off, it's going to be worth a hell of a lot more than $600,000. The other thing, of course, is you've got stability. You've got shelter here. That's first and foremost, shelter. You need a roof over your head. You're not at the whim of your landlord giving you an eviction notice, or telling you he's going to renovate, or telling you his sister-in-law or sister's going to move into the unit, or he's selling the property and he's giving you 2 clear months. You've got stability. The other thing, of course, is it's the greatest tax shelter we have as Canadians. Take advantage of it. We don't get much in this country. We don't. You're capped on your RSP contribution, and we're now at $6,000 for the TFSA. It used to be 10. Unlimited amount of capital gains you can shelter in your principal residence. Do the math on this. RSPs are great, but when it comes time to start drawing down that RSP, you're taxed at your full marginal rate. Now, in some cases, it might be a little more favorable rate when you retire. But if you take my advice, you're not going to be in a lower tax bracket. If you do what you're supposed to do and you get a $2 or $3 or $4 million portfolio, then you're going to be in every bit as a high tax bracket then as you are today. So it's going to be taxed at 50%. Take advantage of the principal residence exemption. It really is incredible. The other thing, for a lot of people, it's a forced savings account. You know, there's this old guy, the guy in Toronto that has that book. I've talked about it many times about renting versus owning, saving the difference and investing it, even though there's no difference to save. But close to 70% of Canadians own their own home. Most people are smart enough to know the benefits of owning versus renting long term. Nothing wrong with it short term, renting. Close to 70% of Canadians own their principal residence. It's not a mystery, or it's not a surprise that by the time these people are 70 or 75 years old, the biggest single asset they own is their home. It's not their RRSP or their TFSA. In most cases, the equity and the value of their home is worth 2 to 3 times what they've got in their RRSP. And that money, of course, will be drawn out completely tax-free, no capital gain. Take advantage of it. But back to that book, you know, there is no, and the guy that wrote that book, of course, you know, that book, that Rent and Save the Difference book, whatever it's called, because I've had a few people ask me about it again, they always do, and it's one of the, my book and this book on Amazon are one of the higher selling real estate books in Canada right now. That book should be changed to the Loser's Hand Guide, because it is incredibly bad advice. Even the author who wrote that book doesn't rent, he owns. That tells you everything you need to know about that strategy. It makes no sense being a long-term renter in a city like Vancouver or Toronto or most cities. There is no difference to save. But when you add up the tax advantages, the creating equity 2 ways, and the stability, it's really a no-brainer. So keep that in mind. You know, stop focusing solely on price. Listen, if you want to wait for a better opportunity to buy your first condo, no problem. Give me a call when you're ready. I would advise you, though, as I've talked about many times, to set a time limit on when you're going to buy and set a strike price. In other words, if the market goes down 5 or 10%, you're going to pull the trigger. If you don't have that, then you're never going to pull the trigger. The market will start going back up again before you realize that was the bottom, if that's what you're trying to do, time a bottom. But again, it's not going to make any difference if you get that condo $10,000 cheaper next year when you're holding the thing for 30 or 35 years, which is what you're going to be doing. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.